Have you ever imagined that a tax war between the US and Canada could drive up food prices, disrupt the tourism industry, and even push Alaska's economy to the brink of collapse? Trump signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on imported goods from Canada. The goods affected include steel, aluminum, and other industrial products. The stated reason is to protect US industries from unfair competition and address issues related to drug smuggling through the northern border. However, these measures are not simple. The US is not only confronting Canada, but now this war has entered a new phase, directly threatening Alaska's economy, which heavily relies on trade routes through Canada. Immediately, Canada responded strongly.
Following a dollar-for-dollar approach, will be imposing, as of 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, March 13th, 2025, 25% reciprocal tariffs on an additional $29.8 billion of imports from the United States.
Canada imposed a $30 billion retaliatory tariff on US goods. The affected products range from fruit juice, wine, household goods, to cosmetics and paper products. However, these retaliatory measures aren't stopping at the federal level. Provinces in Canada, including British Columbia, BC, Ontario, and Quebec, have started rolling out their own strategies to counter US tariffs. We must pay particular attention to British Columbia, the largest province on the western side of Canada, which has introduced an extremely bold retaliatory measure, a tariff on US commercial trucks passing through the province to reach Alaska.
It is set to introduce legislation that would allow the province to charge US commercial trucks driving to Alaska through BC. Premier David Eby made the announcement shortly after the U.S. paused tariffs on some Canadian goods.
This could lead to an increase in shipping costs for goods from the U.S. to Alaska, which in turn would raise the prices of essential items like fresh food, cosmetics, and electronics. This is not an easy measure. According to experts, if this measure is enforced, shipping costs will skyrocket, and you can imagine this increase will be passed on to the prices of consumer goods, making life difficult for Alaskan residents, especially those living in remote areas where road delivery is mandatory. To better understand, you need to know that Alaska depends on the Alaska Highway, a route approximately 2,450 kilometers long, running through British Columbia and Yukon, connecting Alaska to the rest of the U.S. Every year, 80% of goods transported from the U.S. to Alaska must pass through these routes. The new tariffs on U.S. trucks will drive transportation costs up significantly, making essential items like fresh vegetables, fresh meat, milk, and other goods much more expensive. The issue doesn't stop at shipping goods. Alaska's tourism industry, a key economic sector for the state, will also be affected. Most cruise ships traveling to Alaska must stop at ports in Canada before continuing their journey.
I think it's his demented way of going, oh, I can negotiate if I put tariffs on things, but I don't support it. And the people don't feel that way with each other. We notice the effects. There's a lot of Canadians that are...
With strong retaliatory measures from Canada, especially British Columbia, Alaska could face an economic crisis. The transportation system, supply chains, and the tourism industry could all be disrupted. The Alaska government needs to work with Canadian leaders to address this issue as soon as possible. Otherwise, Alaska will continue to face severe consequences for prices and the economy in the coming months. Stay tuned to the video, as the upcoming developments will leave you shocked, and you won't want to miss the far-reaching effects of this trade war on the economy and our lives. Canada is facing one of its biggest trade crises in years. Donald Trump has announced new tariffs on Canadian goods, increasing pressure on Ottawa to back down. Meanwhile, Mark Carney, the newly elected leader of the Liberal Party, has declared that Canada will not retreat. This is not just an economic battle. It's a test of national sovereignty. Can Mark Carney stand firm against Trump, or will Canada be pulled into America's game? On March 3rd, Mark Carney officially became the leader of the Liberal Party, succeeding Justin Trudeau and positioning himself to become Canada's next Prime Minister. But Carney is not a career politician. He previously served as Governor of the Bank of Canada from 2008 to 2013, guiding the country through the global financial crisis. He later became Governor of the Bank of England from 2013 to 2020, making history as the first Canadian to lead a foreign central bank. And on his very first day in office, he found himself in a direct confrontation with Donald Trump, who was applying heavy economic pressure on Canada. Carney declared, "We are not looking for conflict, but Canada will not back down." On April 2nd, the Trump administration announced steep tariff increases on Canadian imports, citing the need to protect American economic interests. The new tariffs will directly impact key Canadian industries: steel and aluminum. The U.S. has imposed a 25% tariff on steel and 10% on aluminum from Canada. Lumber. Canada supplies 34% of the U.S.'s imported lumber, yet Trump has announced new tariffs on this sector. Automobiles. Canada's auto industry, valued at $85 billion, is also at risk if tariffs continue to escalate. Mark Carney refuses to give in. He has pledged to maintain retaliatory tariffs against the U.S., including higher tariffs on American agricultural products, such as dairy, eggs, and beef. Increased tariffs on U.S. technology, including smartphones and laptops imported from the U.S. "We do not want to fight, but we will not bow down," Carney stated firmly. The immediate impact. Prices of consumer goods have risen in both Canada and the U.S. Canadian exporters face billions of dollars in potential losses. Economic experts warn that if the trade war continues, Canada could lose up to 100,000 jobs in the manufacturing sector. But this is not just about economics, it's about national pride. In response to growing criticism, the Trump administration introduced a surprising justification. The tariffs, they claim, are not a trade war, but part of a fight against fentanyl, a highly dangerous synthetic drug. As a result, tariffs are supposedly intended to pressure Canada into tightening its drug enforcement policies. But what's the truth? According to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, only 43 pounds of fentanyl were seized at the Canada-U.S. border last year. This accounts for less than 1% of all fentanyl intercepted in the U.S. An economic expert raised the question, if fentanyl is really the main reason, why aren't these tariffs targeting Mexico, where fentanyl smuggling into the U.S. is 100 times greater? Is this truly about fighting drugs or just another tactic to pressure Canada? The escalating confrontation between Mark Carney and Donald Trump has completely reshaped Canada's political landscape. Mark Carney has made it clear, this is a defining moment for Canada's future. Will we stand tall or will we kneel? The Conservative Party, led by Pierre Poilievre, has seized the opportunity to attack Carney. Poilievre accuses Carney of being too weak to stand up to the U.S. He declared, "Carney isn't fighting for Canada. He's helping Trump take our jobs." The upcoming Canadian election will be a decisive battle. Will Canadians choose Mark Carney, the financial expert promising to defend Canada's sovereignty? Or will they support Pierre Poilievre, a hardline conservative with close ties to Trump? This is more than just an election. It's a confrontation over Canada's future. Will Canada hold its ground, or will it give in to U.S. pressure? Can you imagine a neighboring country standing up to Trump and really striking back? This isn't a fictional story. Recently, Canada made a bold move that blindsided President Trump in the escalating trade war between the two nations. When Trump announced a 25% tariff on Canadian goods on February 1st, he was confident no country would dare respond. However, contrary to his expectations, Canada not only opposed the move, but retaliated with a powerful strategy. This firm response took the U.S. by surprise. Instead of accepting it, Canada stood its ground, determined to protect its economy and sovereignty. In fact, in 2024, Canada exported goods worth $12.7 billion to the U.S., while the U.S. exported more than $349 billion to Canada, making this trade relationship extremely important and intensifying the stakes of this conflict. This is a clear sign that long-standing trade relations can be severely threatened by unilateral tariff policies. What's notable is that Canada's response didn't just come from the government, but had strong support from the entire society. Politicians and citizens alike rallied together, calling for unity to resist what they saw as U.S. impositions. the Canadian government announced it would impose a 25% tariff on approximately $30 billion worth of U.S. goods, a move that's unprecedented in the history of U.S.-Canada relations. This decision reflects not only frustration with U.S. policies, but also sends a strong message about Canada's autonomy and its ability to stand firm in a complex global trade environment. But it's not just Canada. Mexico, also caught in this tariff conflict, declared it would retaliate on March 8th if Trump didn't reverse his tariffs. At the same time, China announced tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, including wheat, corn, chicken, cotton, and even fruits, vegetables, and dairy. Totaling around 15% tariffs on U.S. goods, this has made the situation even more tense. And Trump certainly couldn't have predicted such strong resistance from all these trade partners. Immediately after the tariffs were imposed, the U.S. stock market reacted negatively. In just 2 days, the Dow Jones dropped 1.5%, the Nasdaq fell 0.35%, and even Best Buy, a major retail brand, saw its stock price plummet by 13%. This was a major shock for investors, clearly demonstrating the direct impact these decisions have on the U.S. economy and key industries. This decline also reflects market concerns over the long-term consequences of these tariff policies. With the new tariffs in place, inflation is rapidly rising. Consumer goods, especially essential imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, will see significant price increases, pushing up the cost of living for American citizens. This will make it harder for consumers to maintain their standard of living as prices climb and wages fail to keep pace. This situation could drag on, creating an unwanted inflation cycle, seriously affecting purchasing power and the quality of life. The trade war doesn't just affect consumers, but also pushes the U.S. economy toward the risk of recession. U.S. businesses will face higher production costs, forcing them to cut spending and investment. This could lead to slower growth and even an increase in unemployment. Companies will struggle to maintain operations effectively in an environment of rising costs and decreasing consumer spending. Major industries like manufacturing, retail, and agriculture could suffer significant losses, deeply impacting the U.S. economy in the long run.
This country has gotten bloated and fat and disgusting and incompetently run.
Wow. Trump's opening remarks were not only surprising, but also raised concerns about his focus as president. Immediately after, Trump fixated on egg prices, claiming they had skyrocketed since he left office. However, according to data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, the average price of a dozen grade A eggs in major U.S. cities was $4.95 in January 2025, up from $2.04 in August 2023. While the price increase is significant, it does not align with Trump's exaggerated portrayal. This raises the question, is Trump genuinely concerned about the economy, or is he merely attempting to blame the previous administration while overlooking the fact that he is now the one in charge? One of the key moments in the meeting occurred when Trump was asked about consumer confidence, an essential metric reflecting economic conditions. Trump claimed that after the election, Americans' confidence had skyrocketed to the highest level in history. However, according to the Conference Board, the Consumer Confidence Index dropped by 7.0 points in February 2025, reaching 98.3, the largest decline since August 2021. Economists attributed this drop to rising inflation fears and looming recession concerns. Shortly after, another unexpected turn occurred when Trump abruptly handed control of the meeting over to Elon Musk. Furthermore, Musk disclosed that they had accidentally cut funding for Ebola prevention, a mistake amounting to $3.2 billion. He assured the public that they had swiftly corrected the issue after facing public backlash. Meanwhile, Trump and Musk boasted about cutting $55 billion in government spending. However, according to NPR, the actual amount cut was only $2 billion. Even more concerning, Trump's new budget plan is expected to add $19 trillion to the national debt over the next decade, while granting $4.5 trillion in tax cuts to the ultra-wealthy. Trump did not stop there. He went on to shock the nation with an unprecedented proposal, selling golden immigration cards for $5 million per person. According to Trump, if the U.S. sells 10 million of these cards, it could generate $50 trillion in revenue, supposedly paying off the national debt. However, economic experts immediately debunked this figure. According to data from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, the U.S. grants an average of 1.1 million green cards per year. To reach Trump's target of 10 million, the U.S. would need to increase immigration by nearly 900%, an impossible feat. Additionally, this plan would allow billionaires, including Russian oligarchs, to buy U.S. citizenship, creating major risks for money laundering and financial manipulation on a global scale. One of the most controversial moments of the meeting came when Trump was asked whether his administration would cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. At first, Trump firmly declared no. Previously, Trump and Musk had claimed that 150-year-olds were receiving benefits. Now, the number had mysteriously increased to 200. But according to a report from the Social Security Administration, SSA, there is no record of any Social Security recipients over the age of 115. Additionally, fraud accounts for less than 0.01% of total Social Security spending. More importantly, critics warn that whenever politicians push for fraud reduction in social programs, their real agenda is cutting essential benefits, a strategy Trump's administration previously attempted in his first term. Does this signal that Trump is once again preparing to slash key social safety net programs? The U.S. imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian imports to apply economic pressure, but just days later, Canada struck back with a massive $155 billion tariff package, directly targeting key American industries. The auto, agriculture, and tourism sectors in the U.S. are now in crisis, with hundreds of thousands of jobs at risk. So who is suffering more? On March 3, 2025, the U.S. officially imposed a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico. The Trump administration claimed this was necessary to protect the American economy and jobs. However, just days later, Canada responded forcefully with a $155 billion countermeasure, hitting some of the most vital U.S. industries. Canada's retaliation plan consists of two phases. Phase 1. Immediate tariffs on $30 billion worth of U.S. agricultural products, processed foods, consumer goods, and industrial materials. Phase 2, March 25, 2025, an additional $125 billion in tariffs targeting the automotive sector, aerospace components, critical minerals, and U.S. technology exports. Beyond tariffs, Canada also introduced non-tariff measures, including restricting oil and gas exports to the U.S., banning U.S. companies from participating in Canadian government projects, encouraging Canadians to boycott U.S. tourism, causing devastating losses to American businesses. This is no longer just a trade dispute. It has become a full-scale economic confrontation. One of the hardest hit industries is the American automotive sector. The reason? Canada plays a crucial role in the U.S. auto supply chain, with tariffs on auto parts, tires, electric vehicle batteries, and semiconductors. The entire industry is suffering the impact. Car prices in the U.S. rise by 12 to 18% due to higher production costs. Major automakers like Ford, GM, and Tesla cut production, resulting in tens of thousands of job losses. U.S. car exports to Canada plummet, dealing a severe blow to industry revenues. Currently, 50% of auto parts used in the U.S. come from Canada. Higher tariffs make vehicle production significantly more expensive. Experts warn that if this trade war drags on, the U.S. auto industry could lose tens of billions of dollars and fall behind European and Asian competitors. The U.S. agriculture sector is also bearing the brunt of Canada's countermeasures. Canada immediately slapped a 25% tariff on key American farm products, including beef, pork, dairy, and poultry, major U.S. exports to Canada. Grains, soybeans, corn, and wheat now facing reduced demand. American whiskey and wine, with Canada cutting back on imports, hitting U.S. beverage manufacturers hard. The impact: over $2.1 billion in lost revenue for American farmers. Many farms on the brink of bankruptcy, especially those dependent on exports to Canada. A Brookings Institution report estimates that more than 400,000 U.S. jobs could be affected if this situation continues. Farmers across America are sounding the alarm, but the Trump administration remains firm on its tariff policies, leaving them trapped in a financial crisis. Beyond manufacturing and agriculture, the U.S. tourism industry has also been severely impacted by the trade war. As soon as the U.S. imposed tariffs, the Canadian government urged citizens to cancel trips to the U.S. The result: $2.1 billion in lost tourism revenue within the first few months. 140,000 American tourism jobs at risk. States like Florida, California, Nevada, New York, and Texas take the biggest hit, as 38% of foreign visitors to the U.S. are Canadian. In Florida alone, the loss of Canadian visitors has cost the state over $400 million in the first quarter of 2025. With Canadian tourists now choosing to vacation domestically or in Europe, the damage to the U.S. travel industry is only getting worse. Canada could cut off gas exports to the U.S., a major shock to America's energy sector. What would happen if the U.S.'s most critical energy source suddenly shut down? What if Canada, America's closest neighbor and key energy partner, decided to cut off its supply of gas, oil, and electricity? This isn't just an unlikely scenario. It could become a stark reality with severe consequences. A full-blown energy crisis, soaring fuel prices, and economic instability. But is this merely a threat or a genuine warning? Imagine this. The U.S. abruptly loses one of its most vital energy suppliers. Oil prices skyrocket, driving up the cost of living and manufacturing. Northern states like Michigan, New York, and Minnesota could plunge into freezing conditions without heating power. This isn't just a hypothetical situation. It could soon be reality if trade tensions between the U.S. and Canada don't cool down. The roots of tension. It all began with the Trump administration's aggressive protectionist trade policies. High tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and other products sparked escalating tensions. Ottawa couldn't sit back and, in response, hinted at a powerful secret weapon: energy. Canada isn't just another trading partner. It's the lifeline of the U.S. economy. Supplying oil, natural gas, electricity, and even nuclear fuel, Canada plays a vital role in sustaining America's industrial strength. Did you know that over 50% of U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada? A staggering number that explains why Washington cannot afford to ignore this crucial relationship. Imagine the consequences of this supply being disrupted. The damage would extend beyond economics. It would create intense political pressure on the White House and major industrial corporations across the nation. Canada's energy leverage. Canada holds an enormous energy advantage. From Alberta's oil fields and natural gas reserves to the clean hydropower generated in Quebec and Manitoba, these resources are vital to the U.S. economy. Cutting off this energy supply wouldn't just be an economic blow. It would trigger a significant political shockwave, shaking the stability of North America's energy market. Let's not forget the lesson from Russia's energy crisis with Europe. Russia once used gas supplies as a geopolitical weapon. So could Canada do the same? If the U.S. continues with its hardline trade policies, would Ottawa consider shifting oil and gas exports to the European Union or even China? The real question isn't just about capability, but whether Canada has the will and determination to play this powerful economic card. What if Canada actually cuts off supply? What if Canada truly shuts off the energy supply? A nightmare scenario could unfold. Oil and gas prices in the U.S. would soar uncontrollably. Northern states like New York, Michigan, and Ohio could face severe heating crises during brutal winters, directly affecting millions of people. But the damage wouldn't stop there. Key U.S. industries, steel production, automotive manufacturing, aviation, and agriculture would struggle under immense cost pressures. Major corporations, lawmakers, and even the White House would be forced to find quick solutions. But by then, would it already be too late to prevent disaster? Is Canada ready to play this card? For Canadians, this isn't just about trade, it's a matter of national pride. The idea of becoming America's 51st state is no longer a harmless joke. It's an insult to a nation fiercely proud of its independence and cultural identity. In Alberta, where oil plays a critical role in the local economy, producers are beginning to ask, if exports to the U.S. stop, could they redirect supplies to China or Europe? The answer, for now, is no. But with time and determination, Canada could build the infrastructure necessary to break free from reliance on the U.S. market. The trade standoff between two neighboring countries, the U.S. and Canada, has now extended beyond typical political issues. Canada's retaliatory actions against the U.S. tariffs are not only immediately affecting the U.S. farming sector, but they could also mark the beginning of a broader crisis in global agriculture. The situation began escalating when the U.S. imposed a 25% tariff on various Canadian goods, including agricultural products such as grains, meat, and dairy. Canada didn't hold back in its response. It immediately retaliated by slapping tariffs on U.S. goods like corn, soybeans, and beef. This has not only increased export costs for U.S. farmers, but also forced them to face immense difficulties in finding alternative markets. Dairy industry. U.S. dairy farmers who have long relied on Canada as a crucial trading partner are now suffering significant losses. The new tariffs have made dairy exports to Canada prohibitively expensive, reducing demand and driving prices down. Many dairy farms in the U.S. are facing severe financial crisis. Grains and soybeans. For corn and soybean farmers, Canada has been one of the largest export markets. However, retaliatory tariffs have caused prices to plummet, and farmers are now stuck with unsold crops. This situation has led to massive financial losses for these farmers. Livestock industry. Cattle and pig. Farmers are also feeling the sting. The cost of exporting meat to Canada has skyrocketed, driving down demand. With prices in freefall and export costs rising, many livestock producers are scrambling to find new markets. This crisis is not just about immediate losses for farmers. It's going to have far-reaching consequences for the economy at the local, national, and even global levels. Global agricultural market. The standoff between the U.S. and Canada could create a significant gap in the global agricultural market, which countries like China, Mexico, and the EU may seize to increase exports where the U.S. and Canada are losing ground. Technological innovation and strategic shifts. In the face of market uncertainty, many farmers are turning to precision agriculture to improve efficiency. However, these technologies require significant investment, and the financial pressure from tariffs is making it more difficult for farmers to invest. Reshaping the agricultural landscape. In the long run, this trade dispute could push for a restructuring of agricultural practices in both the U.S. and Canada. Many small, family-owned farms may be forced to sell to larger corporate farms, accelerating farm consolidation. Emotional and social toll. Beyond financial hardships, farmers are facing significant emotional distress. With the mounting financial pressures, the mental health of farmers is becoming an increasingly critical issue. This trade war between the U.S. and Canada may be a major setback for the U.S. farming industry, but it could also represent a turning point in global agricultural trade. While the immediate impacts are severe, there are also potential opportunities for farmers and countries to adapt to new markets and find innovative solutions. The future of agriculture will depend on how these sectors respond to the rapidly changing trade landscape. After Canada announced a $760 billion USD plan to retaliate against Trump's tariffs, the EU quickly responded with a $40 billion USD retaliatory tariff package. Is this the beginning of a global trade war? The European Union didn't take long to respond. Right after President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, the EU quickly introduced a 26 billion euro retaliatory tariff package, equivalent to about 40 billion US dollars.
Similar to Canada's, they've been very quick and very strict, announcing retaliatory duties on industrial and farm products totaling 26 billion euros.
The products targeted include industrial items like machinery, cars, and agricultural goods like fruits, vegetables, and wine. Recently, the EU has imposed tariffs on over 2,800 US products, including items like Levi's jeans, whiskey, and Boeing spacecraft. US businesses, particularly in agriculture and industry, will face significant losses due to the loss of export markets. And not only that, they will also face increased production costs. Trade between Canada and the EU has grown by 7% since the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, took effect. A wave of Canadian businesses has quickly taken advantage of this agreement, shifting from the US to potential markets in Europe and Asia. What will the future hold for US businesses? Mexico, one of the US's largest trade partners and the second largest steel exporter, has chosen a slow and steady approach in its response. They didn't rush to impose retaliatory measures immediately. The Mexican government, under President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, decided to negotiate and seek a peaceful solution. But at the same time, they didn't rule out the possibility of imposing tariffs on US goods if necessary. However, Mexico isn't just facing the impact of US tariffs, but also dealing with a decline in exports and the escalating trade tensions that could greatly affect its economy. Analysts forecast that Mexico's steel industry will need to reduce output, while the agricultural sector will face significant challenges, dealing with higher tariffs on products like tomatoes and avocados. The situation in Brazil is not much different. As the second largest steel exporter to the US, Brazil is trying to find a way to respond to this decision. Brazil's finance minister, Fernando Haddad, criticized the US tariffs as unreasonable and wrong, and declared that they would seek legal measures at the World Trade Organization, WTO. However, like Mexico, Brazil has decided not to rush into retaliation, but instead will patiently pursue negotiation options to avoid escalating tensions. Tariff retaliations not only affect the partner countries, but also have a significant impact on US businesses. The steel industry will be one of the most affected sectors, as the new tariffs will raise the cost of imported steel, increasing production costs in US factories. This not only drives up product prices, but also diminishes the competitiveness of US products in the international market. The EU has shown strength in this decision and has not hesitated to respond forcefully.
The objective is to counterbalance the increased trade value affected by the US tariffs while minimizing the impact on European businesses and consumers. But the disruption caused by tariffs is avoidable if the US administration accepts our...
However, the issue is not just about the tariffs, but also the political relationship. EU countries have agreed that the US tariff policy not only has a negative impact on the global economy, but also disrupts stability in international trade relations. Stay tuned, because the twists and turns could impact you.